Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. My name is Blair Satterfield. I am the chair of the Master of Architecture program here at UBC SALA and a professor. I'm going to allow the folks here on the screen to introduce themselves, and then I will begin our presentation and our talk with all of you. So, Case.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kees Lokman, and I'm the chair of the Landscape Architecture program. I'll pass it along to Janice.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janice. I'm the Student Services Coordinator for the Architecture program.
Hi, everyone. I'm Noura. I'm in my third and final year of the Master of Landscape Architecture program, prior to which I also completed an undergrad in urban forestry at UBC.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eamon. I'm in my third year of my Master of Architecture program, so working on my graduate project. And prior to coming here, I did a bachelor's in design and environmental analysis.
Great. Well, thank you all. Well, I'll say 6 of you, because Emma is the UBC SALA word that you see there, and she's a central member of our staff, and she's helping to coordinate this event today. Today, what we're going to do is really briefly share some thoughts and some musings on the programs that we offer in the graduate program in both landscape architecture and architecture. We're going to give Noura and Ayman a chance to talk a little bit about their experiences here, and then the majority of the time spent will be devoted to allowing all of you to ask us questions about really anything you're thinking about concerning the programs, what it's like to be here, the type of experience you might have at UBC SALA, or questions you might even have about the application process, those types of things.
Maybe while Blair is getting started to present, it would be useful maybe for us to, if you could in your chat, maybe identify where you're calling in from and what program perhaps you're interested in. That might be interesting for us to know. And also for everyone on the call.
Yeah, and I think that should show up in the question and answer portion. Is that right, Case?
I think they can do it in the chat, and if you have a question, you should post that in the Q&A.
Gotcha.
Yes, both are open.
Great. So without further ado, I'm going to share a PDF with you, and I'm going to try to go full screen here. Is that still showing up for everybody?
Yeah, it's not full screen, but
really, that's interesting.
It's in your kind of PDF window, but it's okay.
Why don't I just stick in the PDF window? We'll not stand on formality with that.
Okay.
All right. By way of introduction, and I think those of you who tuned in and heard Ron give his kind of overview of SALA writ large. You know, SALA is a program that's comprised that comprises a variety of different different sub-programs within it. Those include MArch, a MASA degree, MARCLA, BDES, MLARC, MASLA, MUD, and MEL, and we can talk a little bit more about what those mean. On the call today, those circled in red are sort of programs that fall under my purview as chair of architecture, and those circled in yellow are those that fall under Case's purview as chair of the Master of Landscape Architecture program. And I drew little arrows too, because one of the things that you'll find if you end up joining us here at SALA is that the professors teach kind of across programs. We aren't really, although we're based within a certain discipline, we tend to work with a majority of the students that come through the program, and that interaction is often very familial and very intimate. So the yellow arrows, and I may not have hit all of them, are programs that I know Case is taught in addition to those that are circled, and the red arrows point to programs that I've taught in addition to those that are circled for me. For those of you interested in architecture, the School of Architecture offers both an advanced placement degree and a non-advanced placement degree in architecture. I think this is true for MLA as well. An AP degree is for those that have done or hold a degree in architecture from their undergraduate studies, and they are able to complete our program in roughly 2 years. The non-paid track is for those of you who are coming to architecture from other disciplines, and your track is a little bit longer, but we can get you through a professional program, I think in roughly 3 years. Some of you on the call may be interested in a Master's of Advanced Studies in Architecture. For those, that's a degree for those of you who have finished your professional degree and want to explore topics more deeply. Kind of like a master's version of a PhD could be a way to think about it conceptually. And then we do also offer a MARCLA degree, which is a degree that combines both architecture and landscape architecture, and you would apply to that separately. It takes a longer time, but the idea is that you get to take advantage of these two foundational master's level degrees that SALA offers and work between those two programs. We're located in Vancouver. Vancouver is an interesting place. It has a lot of traits and things that you'll get to explore and experience. And the place that you decide to do your master's degree is an important decision that you're going to make, because more than likely you will be building connections and associations and relationships within the kind of bigger community that you're situated within. Vancouver is known for being an international city. It's a major port. It's a resource extraction hub. It's a city that's very connected to nature. And it's also has a reputation for being Hollywood North. It's a place of production. And I bring that up because as some of you on the call would expect, I'm going to talk a little bit about movies as I set up a description of what we're talking about. And specifically, I'm going to do a really short reflection on this exact meeting, which happened almost exactly 2 years ago today. I think it was November 24th of 2019. I sat in front of a bunch of students, that time I think in person, and talked about November of 2019 as an important date, because it's the date that Blade Runner was set in. And at the time, that seemed like a really interesting thing to me, because Blade Runner, when it came out in 1982 in movie form, and also its publication in 1968, but the movie Blade Runner, which was directed by Ridley Scott, at the time that I entered graduate school and for decades after, was kind of a touchstone for architects and designers. It was that because of a variety of reasons. One, it presented a kind of complete vision of what one possible future could be. And it did it through design. The movie is really a heavily designed and kind of curated thing. And it was very, very interesting to those of us. At the time, when I was a graduate student and before, November of 2019 seemed like the very distant future. So it was also interesting to me that I actually had arrived at a moment that I'd been thinking about since I was in high school, and I was sitting in that place, right? And I was getting to see how the world was very different and similar to what that movie presented. And the movie brings forward a lot of topics and things that we grapple with today. So the movie was about basic human rights. It had a strong multiculturalist kind of undertone to it. It was about self-determination versus the state. It was about corporate power and how that related to the bigger kind of environment of the world of politics and social justice. It was a movie built around distributed infrastructure, climate change, scarcity and species loss. There were flying cars, there were cities without ground, there was hyperdensity. There were all these things that we still talk about and we grapple with today. We fast forward to 3-4 months later in March of 2020, we were left with all of those questions. And the one thing that I think we got from Blade Runner was Zoom, that we were talking to each other on screens all of a sudden. So it was a kind of future, but it wasn't necessarily the future we had all imagined. I also like to bring up that movie because it's science fiction. I personally really enjoy science fiction. I read science fiction, I watch a lot of it, and I think about it quite a bit. I like science fiction for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's very rigorous and rules driven. Good science fiction works if you've ever been around or you yourself are a science fiction nerd, you know that if there's a flaw in the logic in a science fiction movie, it's all over. We're all debating it. We're having arguments about it. It's a serious thing. The other thing I think is interesting about science fiction is that it's about imagining the built world across scales, and it's about a kind of futurism. And I would argue that whether you're designing a school for a community next to you that's going to be built in 3 years, or we're thinking about carbon futures or the consequence of the built environment, or we're thinking about social justice in the next decade, 2 decades, or 3 decades, we're engaging in the act of futurism. We're thinking about a world that isn't there yet. We're thinking about and working as designers on how we might begin to enable or construct that world, and we move forward into that space. So whether you're designing something for tomorrow or designing for 10 years, it's a futurism because that isn't there, and it's up to us as designers to manifest those things. I also think that architecture and landscape architecture, like science fiction, relies on history and theory. You have to know your past if you're going to plan your future. There's a rigor to those disciplines. We think about technology, physics, science, environment, aesthetic and detail. There's craft and context in the disciplines that we engage in, just like there is in science fiction. Good science fiction is a way for us to grapple with our cultural constructs, our social and political relationships. The idea of justice, empathy, and inclusion are all a part of any good narrative. And I think science fiction is a place for us to explore those ideas. All those things matter in the discipline. In 2019, we were optimistic, I think, a little bit more maybe about what the future held. 2020 kind of blew. I think everybody here would agree that it was not the best year, but it was an interesting year. And I think it was a year where we got to sit back and assess and kind of think about our relationships to one another. 2021, we're still kind of gripping, but maybe we're coming out of it. And then I think, and personally, there's a kind of acceptance of where we are. There is a familiarity with some of the new challenges that we face, and that we're beginning to move forward again with a kind of optimism. And you'll see that at the school. We're beginning to be in person and together again, and we're engaging the world and kind of progressing a lot of the issues that we faced in 2020. So these visions for the future, and this is the opening shot of Blade Runner, where we see the protagonist's eye looking at the world around them. I think at SALA, one of the things that I really love about the place and I appreciate is that there are multiple authors and there are multiple protagonists in the stories that we tell. I think that really comes across when we look at things like what our students themselves work on. So this is a kind of screen from Salon from, I think, 2 years ago. What you're seeing here is a list of the various thesis projects that our architecture students and landscape architecture students were working on at the time. And that's important because the questions that our students begin to ask as they think about how they engage the world through the lens of design really begin to create a kind of crowdsourced image of what our school is and what our values are and what it is that we think about as a community. And I will, full disclosure, I think Case would agree 100% with this. When we as a faculty begin to think about the next moves for the school, we look at what our students are doing as they leave the school and how they begin to engage the world, to begin to frame that discussion and to begin to frame how we begin to introduce the kind of value, the agency, and the possibility of design to the next generation and cohort of students that come through. Our school experience is very much studio-based. It also has, as Ron really did a great job of describing, a lot of very hands-on kind of experiential things that we try to build into the program. And design is about manifesting your ideas, even though we work in simulation and prototype quite a lot of the time. Everybody on this call, I would assume, is here by design, and everybody on the Zoom call, if you do decide to join SALA, will be and can help shape what SALA is and shape how our school moves forward. And I'll leave and hand off to Case with this image that I love quite a bit. Thinking about Blade Runner, this is actually a shot of Granville Street in Vancouver. And as I think it was Neri on the previous call pointed out, it is a kind of wet kind of vital, kind of neon place at times. And I think that the kind of correlation between fact and fiction, you'll see it's much flatter than what it may seem from a distance. So with that, I will stop sharing and I will hand off to Case.
Excellent. Thank you, Blair. That's fantastic start here. Let me see. Can everyone see that? So as mentioned, my name is Kees Lockman. I'm an associate professor and chair of the program. I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from you from my home here, which is in the Fraser neighborhood in Vancouver, which is situated on the stolen and traditional territories of the Coast peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And I'm humbled to live, learn, and work here. And I want to talk a little bit about site matters, and this is related to kind of the landscape architecture program. This is one of the earliest maps here drawn by a settler, but kind of indicating the rich kind of the living landscape that has been in this area for thousands of years, with many indigenous villages, streams, forests, and uplands, and mud flats that were part of this territory. This is the only big chunk of text that I'll show you, but a few years ago, I was reading this book by Jonathan Raban called Driving Home, An American Journey. And he's an interesting writer. And in the introduction, he discusses how one can observe and consider writing, language, and landscapes as a better way to understand people, context, place, and history. And in this, kind of quote here, he's saying, trying to understand the habitat in which we live requires an ability to read it, and not just in a loose metaphorical sense. Every inhabited landscape is a palimpsest, its original parchments nearly blackened with the cross-hatching of successive generations and authors. And so landscapes are very much living. They continuously evolve, and there's constant kind of implications of those that inhabit the landscapes, and we can read and trace and try to understand how we can intervene in them. This particular area here, the Fraser River Delta, has been formed over the past 15,000 years ago. And as part of this landscape, there's been a lot of processes of settlement, erasure, development, and transformation. The oceans and waterways have long been central to the life and culture of indigenous people in what is now called the Pacific Northwest. And the land itself has been shaped by a diversity of cultures who in turn transformed the land. Shown here is an image of a clam garden. It's something that I'm interested in my own research, that land-water interface. But clam gardens are an ancient mariculture technique that involved building a rock wall at the lowest low tide line, and in order to capture sediment in the creation of oceanic terraces that can be inhabited by clams and a diversity of species, providing at once food security for those living here, as well as critical habitat for a whole range of species. Post-colonizations, where these clam gardens could be seen as very subtle interventions, interventions in our region have been much more forceful, transforming entire shorelines, displacing communities, changing hydrological systems, and introducing new modes of occupation. Shown here is the transformation of Falls Creek in the center of Vancouver, from something that had mud flats, tidal flats, and rivers running into it, to something that is now a series of public spaces and kind of the dense heart of Vancouver. And these transformations, as I alluded to and Blair, are not always agreed upon. There's a lot of power relationships and vested interests that need to be kind of understood when kind of designing landscapes and intervening in landscapes. And, we do a lot of, there's students and faculty do a lot of research in kind of the historical trajectories that have led to changes in our region. And Vancouver has many of those that are often controversial and and need kind of great attention given to. And landscapes are always changing, and some of these changes happen hourly and daily, like weathers or tides. Others are seasonal, and yet others, like sea level rise and climate change, are unfolding over the next several decades. And so it's kind of understanding how to design with change. And for those I saw in the chat, there's a lot of you are actually interested in joining our school, coming from this region. We've been hit pretty hard from a series of events in the past. So we have ongoing flooding currently. And so, how can we think of design as a catalyst to think of these twin challenges of climate change and climate justice? How can we link adaptation to decolonization? We've been hit hard with fires that have devastated communities and habitats and First Nations. So how can we design with the dynamics of nature, and what can be learned from indigenous peoples and local communities? How can we make use of nature-based solutions? How can we help regenerate these ecosystems and our communities? And how can we envision communities in a way that can manage potential future hazards? And as been said, I think all of what we do is a collaborative and effective co-creation. The way we work in studios, the way we work as a faculty, and the way we work as students with our communities and with each other's. And we do this by looking at across scales, from kind of a garden scale to more of a regional landscape scale. We represent these landscapes and these stories that we're seeing. And here, I love this is actually from an ENTS collection of ENTS students, but really a light box of these really overlaying stories and ways of reading and marking down landscapes. We also look at infrastructural systems, and we use animation to kind of understand how we can use representation to tell different stories, to show cascading effects of impacts that might be happening in the future. And we're really about speculation, and a lot of what you'll hear is what if scenarios, what could happen if we do certain things, and what might be the result of that. So here's a drawing by Sam McFall that is looking into how we could kind of give rivers more space and move our infrastructures and critical assets to higher ground to restore riparian habitat. And lastly, at the human scale, we investigate programmatic objectives, climatic and site conditions, maintenance constraints affecting planting design, and we also examine the role and importance of design in fostering human health and well-being. With that, I would say, SALA, thanks you for being here, and we look forward to your questions. And with that, I'll pass it on to Nora and Eamon.
Okay, just one sec. I'll get my presentation up. Okay, hello everyone. For those who joined the call a bit late, I am Noura Hidra, and I'm in my third and final year of the Master of Landscape Architecture program. And I joined after completing a Bachelor of Urban Forestry at UBC. And today I'll just be sharing some graphic work that I'm quite proud of, and stressing how this program has helped me cultivate an interdisciplinary approach towards design and build relationships with other groups, research groups, professional groups throughout Vancouver and beyond. So the first project that I have on screen right now is a competition that I did with Professor Fionn Byrne at SALA, alongside other students in the Master of Landscape Architecture and the Master of Architecture. It's an opportunity that I'm quite proud of. It's an international design competition, and we received honorable mentions for this. It will be published in the near future. So definitely an opportunity that I wouldn't have been able to engage with had I not been in this program. Secondly, this graphic is from some work that I did with the City of Vancouver as a sustainability scholarship at UBC. So a bit more academic. And this one has real world consequences because it does inform the Vancouver plan. It was an opportunity to work closely with the City Design Studio at Vancouver and cultivate those professional connections that I can reach out to as I finish school and go on to work professionally. A somewhat similar project that I'm involved with at the moment is at the Elements Lab, which is a research group at UBC. It's led by Professors Cynthia Gerling and Ron Kellett. You already met Ron earlier today. And it's geospatial work. This one, once again, partners closely with the City of Vancouver, and it also works closely with the Faculty of Forestry at UBC. So very multidisciplinary work, once again, very grounded in sort of the futurism that Blair mentioned earlier today, that this will inform how we shape our urban environments in the near future. And finally, I just want to share this graphic from my thesis project, which is currently underway, in which I've partnered with Saskatoon Nation, located near Williams Lake in the interior of British Columbia. And in the context of, in the post-colonial context that we currently inhabit, it's been, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to work with Indigenous communities and build those relationships that I can carry on developing even after I graduate. Ivan, I'll hand over to you.
Sure, so I'll jump in here. For anyone who missed the introduction, my name is Emini Channing. I am a third year in my Master of Architecture program working on my thesis. I'm an international student from Beirut, so I've been living in Vancouver, I guess about 2.5 years now. And I'm just going to be chatting a bit about some of the experiences that I've gotten the chance to have as part of the Master of Architecture program. So these photos here are from a trip to Mexico City that I took in my first year. I was lucky enough to do a studio that was looking at Mexico City and public space and masonry. And so we actually got to go to Mexico City as part of site design, as part of site research, and get to take in some of the architecture there and see the sites, visit the site, actually work with some masonry. It was a very sort of interesting, hands-on kind of immersive experience, and I was really grateful for it. And more recently, I'm currently in a studio that is looking at decentering human comfort and centering environmental comfort in the architectural paradigm. So early on in the term, we got the chance to go to Manning Park, camp overnight and hike through the Alpines to dislodge some of our comforts and kind of begin to unpack our ideas about our relationship with the natural world. So these are some images from that. As part of the program, I've done a comprehensive studio, which is kind of conceptualizing the technical. So you kind of are going from concept and looking at also environmental systems and structure. It's very much like from the top down all the way to the nitty-gritty of the details. And it makes for a really kind of thorough and kind of every little detail of the project you kind of get to touch on, and that's really, you learn a lot from that process. So these are some images from my work with Lydia Connor in that studio, and we were designing a bathhouse complex along with some other program functionalities. As part of this program, I've gotten the chance to, I think, really grow in terms of my graphic representation, and part of that is because in studios, we've been empowered to experiment and explore the ways that we draw things and represent things. And so I think that these are some images that I've created as part of that comprehensive project that kind of demonstrate sort of the level of play that I was getting the chance to do as part of my studios. And kind of on that same note, one thing that's been really nice is that you kind of get asked very early on in this program, like, what are you interested in? And there is opportunity for self-initiative. So I came into the program thinking I'm interested in architecture, I'm interested in production design, I'm interested in a bunch of things, but then I also tapped into an interest in video games. And I realized I wanted to look at that through the lens of architecture. And so with Blair as my supervisor, actually, I did a directed study where I worked in game space and I designed kind of a game structure that could actually be navigated and played within. And these are just some images from that experience. So I think kind of what I want to emphasize here is that, if you have an interest, there's certainly people that have an open ear to that. And you're able to kind of find opportunities to pursue, anything kind of within the realm of what you feel you may be passionate about and sort of follow those leads. And I think that's the end of the presentation here. So I guess we'll toss it back, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Eamon and Nora.
Yeah, thank you both. Those are, great presentations. And I think, as important, and one of the things we're trying to communicate here is a really good insights into two very different experiences at the school. But I think too that represent potential and possibility for what you're going to be able to do when you arrive at UBC. So I think at this point, unless somebody else has another idea, I think we could open the floor to questions. I see that there are questions kind of mounting in the Q&A section on the side. I've answered a couple of them. I know Janice has too as well. What we'll do is we'll read through the questions and try to answer some of them kind of live here. Also, we'll do our best to address some of them in text form, written form. So everybody should have access to both clearly what you're seeing on the screen, but also the answers that we've been posting.
So someone is asking about the MLA program for a part-time student. Janice might probably know what it means to how many credits you need to be enrolled in, things like that.
So yeah, so there is actually no part-time option for the program, which means that there's no part-time fee structure. So there's only a full-time program. So even if you choose to do a few less classes a term, something like that, there's only one full-time fee. So it's not really to your advantage to do that. Sometimes students will choose to do that for a variety of reasons, if they want to work or something like that. But I would say most students go through on the regular path. It can also be a little bit complicated in terms of pre and co-requisites to start switching the program around because there are so many required courses. So yeah, I would say a part-time option is not super easy. So if that's the way you want to enter, then just think about those issues a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe I would add on to that. So I know in the landscape program, and I think previously in the architecture program, there's quite some students that have taken 4 years or 4.5 years to complete the program, and they've taken, let's say, a semester or an entire year to work or to take a co-op or to distribute their classes. So yeah, I think Janice mentioned this as well. So that would be one way of doing full-time as part-time. That sounds a little bit strange, but you can stretch your degree, and we will work with you to kind of accommodate what you want to do. Hopefully that answers your question there.
I'll add that students sometimes choose to draw their degrees out as well to take advantage of opportunities within the school. So if they want to do a co-op or there's a specific study abroad or design build that they want to engage in and they feel the need to take extra time, they do that. It's not as common, but that is a kind of flexibility in how you schedule yourself.
Yeah, it definitely does happen. And I only deal with MArch, and so I will work with the MArch students to rearrange their program if it is something they want to do. It just has to be something we do kind of together because it does become a little complicated, but
Yeah.
I'm happy to do that.
So the next question, I think it's two questions, but I think probably many of you probably have that question. So from applicants with non-AP background, or I would say probably you mean like non-design backgrounds, what are you looking for in the portfolio and statement of intent, and what should we be focusing on, and what should references focus on when writing their reference letters? I think at the link we have I think on the website a link to a portfolio session that we recorded last year, so that's a little bit more about the portfolio. We're really looking for how you stand in life in terms of how you see things creatively. So if you have a background in writing or something like that, like how do you approach writing, and what's the process, and how do you see writing as a structure that could also kind of translate to design in a way? You know, after like, so I think we're really looking for in your kind of letter for ways in which you see the world, and how you think that your background in seeing the world might apply to architecture or landscape architecture. And we understand that for those that have a non-design background, I think the portfolio might be a little bit more challenging because you have less pieces to maybe fill it up. So it's really not something that we need to see like 20 or 50 different sketches or things like that. I think focus on the things that you're proud of and that you think show a little bit of yourself. And we're interested in process. So if you're able to show even how you're structuring, like going back to the example of if you have a background in writing, how do you structure a paper? How do you think about this? How do you visualize this? You know, so I think we're really kind of interested in kind of you showing from kind of creative problem solving, like there's a problem that you encountered and how did you try to solve it? Once we get insight in that, I think that really helps us to kind of understand who you are. And as you can see here, and maybe, you know, I'll pass it on to Nura and Eamon as well, like we also try to recruit a diversity of voices. We're not looking for only people with a design background, right? I think we like it that we have a very broad diversity of students that can help each other, bring in different perspectives, and you know, that helps throughout for the culture. So there's no you're not in any kind of disadvantage not having a design background.
Yeah, I'll Nora and Eamon jump in as well if they have something to add, but I'll say that, you know, if you do have a design background that isn't architecture, of course, that's something you should demonstrate. One of the things that I see a lot in portfolios is students go out of their way to try to show a kind of proficiency, like they've practiced. So they show 12 projects that they've done in practice, those types of things. I think a point that everybody should hear very clearly and take away from Case's description is that we want to know who you are. We want to know what your role in projects has been. And that could be anything, like Case said, from writing to helping to put a presentation together, to working on a political campaign, to, you know, doing some very specific creative research in one of the sciences. Any of those things are absolutely valid. How you describe those experiences to us and the way that you tease out what is critical in your mind in those events or those activities that you've done is absolutely something that we're looking for. Kind of attached to that same question, it's kind of hard to tell a recommender or somebody who's writing a letter for you what they should write, but you know, it might be who you are, how you interact with others, how do you work collaboratively, what kind of thinker are you? Are you a creative person? You know, what was your relationship to the bigger course, the bigger body, the subject that you were working on, the research, the job, those types of things. I think generally, if you hit any of those or most of those things, a recommendation letter should take care of itself. Ayman, Nora, do you have things to add, or I see nodding. Eamon's nodding, so that's
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So I do have a design background, but after I finished, I did many different things. I was working on set design projects, I was writing poetry, I had my interior design experience. And so when I came to the portfolio, I wasn't really sure kind of how to sort of collect all that. But what helped me was to try and focus on my process rather than kind of the overall outcomes of things. Like I tried to kind of include, as I showcased the projects, how I was actually thinking my way through them. And so that's only my experience personally, but I found that that was one thing that helped me thread through the different kinds of things that I had done.
Yeah, in a similar kind of vein, like I had no serious design experience to speak of when I applied. And I think it helps to just show how you formulate problems, like defining problems in space, making sure that you're showing something that's quite spatial, or at least it's a physical, design product. And not to get hung up on the technicality, because once you join the program, the first year is largely dedicated to teaching technical skills. You'll learn all the software. There's time to do all of that. So we're really much more interested in how people think about design problems, who they are, how they navigate the world, that kind of thing.
That's great.
Sam is asking about the study abroad.
Right.
It depends. It depends really. So the study abroad, the way that it's run here is that we invite faculty and adjuncts to propose options for study abroad, and then we have sessions typically around this time of year where we present that to students. And the faculty, those that are kind of leading the studies abroad, are really in charge of setting up how they want to run it. So Leslie, one of our colleagues, has had relationships with photographers in Scandinavia, where she teamed up with a photographer, and they did kind of a study abroad on photographing architectural buildings and spaces in a series of cities. I've taken students to Mexico City, and I worked with the university and someone that I knew at the university there. So it's really kind of diverse. I think Eamon was just sharing about Bill, I think, taking students to Mexico City and partnering with a Mason. So it's a little bit open, but it's really, when the offerings for studies abroad are presented, you'll learn more about how it's set up and what the kind of expectations are there.
I'd also add that there is travel sometimes associated with studios. We might make trips into kind of more local trips to parts of Canada. We go to the States at times for studio trips. Study abroads currently are kind of an M-term, a May-term event that happened for 2, 3, 4 weeks during May. In the past, we have run full semester study abroads. Those are often contingent on faculty's availability to do those trips. We've had a recent series of SALA children born, and that's kind of slowed down full semester long study abroads and have shifted focus to other trips. And I do know that students also have opportunities to do exchanges and to go abroad on their own as individuals. So there are a variety of ways through Go Global and some other entities on campus. So there are ways to travel through the school, and some of it is just your timing. Like I took students to Brazil, and we worked with a local university there and spent a lot of time in favelas and moving around the kind of urban infrastructure in that way. But that's because at that moment I was thinking about those things.
So there was a question, a second question around this. Yeah, so we are offering, I think it's 2, right, for upcoming summer.
2 for the upcoming summer, a little bit contingent. One of them is to go to Japan, and Japan hasn't opened its doors to visitors yet. So we'll know by February whether or not that one's going to launch. But yeah,
And we actually had, I think not this past summer, the summer before, we had one COVID study abroad in actually the Netherlands. So I think Bill and yeah, there were tours with people in the Netherlands. So we hopefully we won't have to do that again, but we have tried even with COVID to give students that experience.
Yeah, Colette did that with Bill.
For Nora and Eamon, how many hours do you spend on campus on an average day? What is your commute like? And is there time left in your day to spend?
For the last year, it's been 0, but up till like now, how much time do you spend on campus?
So I have a commute of about 40 to 45 minutes. I take the bus. It's right outside where I live, so it's quite convenient. It varies from student to student. I mean, if you manage to get a place that's closer to campus, it could be as short as 15 minutes. You could even end up living on campus. And I think some of the longest commutes that I've seen have been up to an hour. So it really depends on where you choose to stay. I tend to spend, I mean, this term has been slightly heavier in terms of how much time I spend on campus. So I'm there nearly every day, about 8 hours a day. So nearly all my time is spent on campus this term, but in previous terms, it's been significantly less. So maybe like 4 to 6 hours a day. You'll find that the program does eat up nearly all of your time though. So it is very demanding on your time, let's just say.
Yeah, as far as my experience goes, I actually in my first year lived on campus in Ponderosa Commons Senior House, I think. And that was real convenient because I could roll out of bed 5 minutes before class and just kind of walk over. But then I wanted to kind of experience more of Vancouver. So I moved out into the Kitsilano neighborhood, and my commute is now about half an hour to let's say, or to the studio building, kind of door to door. And I find that works pretty well, goes pretty quick. One thing that kind of has been an outcome of this last year is that I have a more kind of robust setup at home. And so I kind of like, as far as class time goes, this term I have about like maybe 4 hours a day, maybe on as far as like actually being in class. But some days I can just kind of work from home if I choose to do that. I may have a day that I don't have classes or something like that. So it does vary from semester to semester, depending on what classes you're taking and kind of what the particular demands are. But the studio is also a very creative space. So sometimes I'm working at home and I crave that as well. So it kind of is, it's helpful for me to have the options. It's definitely like, it takes a kind of ferocity of mind to be like, I'm going to organize my time in this way and make sure to prioritize this in these parts of my life. It's a kind of a time management exercise for sure. I will say that I, realized a while ago, I was like, I think I want to spend more time exploring some hobbies. So I like integrated them into my projects in one way or another. And that was my workaround. You don't necessarily need to do it. Not everything needs to be kind of associated with work, but I've found enrichment from that personally. So that's where my video games projects came from.
Which I do also professionally. Take time out, play some video games. The next question that Noah asked, I would assume is something that people thinking about the MLA program and the MARC program are asking. Absolutely, you'd be welcome to bring, and I think Nora and Eamon touched on this as well. We encourage you to bring your interests and things that you have been kind of carrying with you or working on or obsessing over or marginally intrigued by with you to school. And if, for example, you'd like to figure out a way to combine the worlds of engineering and music in a theoretical, poetic, and practical way, we will support that for sure. We've had several projects actually that have done that. Some have ended with students that have done projects that relate to music more specifically in the experience of it. In fact, Roxanne recently did a GP, I think 3-4 years ago, that had to do with music, and has since gone on to, I think she has like a visiting position as an artist in residence that deals with the intersection of architecture and music and is creating kind of public event spaces. We have others that have gone on to do work that deals more specifically with acoustics and the kind of physics of music and sound. Some that have crossed over into the world of accessibility and working with those who are differently abled and trying to find ways that we could think of buildings or landscapes through sound or touch or other experiences instead of privileging sight, which is often what we do, and privileging a kind of standardized mobility, which is what we frequently do. So much space for you to explore those ideas, and we absolutely welcome it at the school. This is maybe an easier one. Case, you want to work on this with me? Have studios returned to in-person learning? And what is the plan going forward for return to campus? This is something Case and I talk about probably once a week.
Yeah, I mean, so we're very much currently in a hybrid space in which like all students have access to studio. They have a desk and they can work in studio spaces. Most studios, I think, are meeting mostly in person. What we try to do is for lectures and important reviews, like have kind of a simulcast option where we also, we have a Zoom call going. So for those students that either are sick that day or for whatever reason are not able to come to class, they can join online. And so this likely won't change in the near future. We're having some discussions for certain classes, for example, that really need to engage materiality and some components that would really benefit in-person learning. We might try to encourage students to really come to these courses, because we're seeing some instructors, they're feeling that they're not getting their content across working in this hybrid mode. So yeah, fingers crossed that new variant isn't gonna deter everything. But yeah, we're on a path to trying to increase more in-person activities, if anything. And right now we're basically, we're hybrid. I would say like 2/3 of the classes are mostly in person again. So I don't know.
Studios are moving more to in person. I think next semester, there'll be, I would assume, more students in studio. We're opening the shops up increasingly, trying to put more access to the shops for students. And bear in mind, this is next semester, and you would be joining this program after the summer and in the incoming fall. So I would think everybody on this call is optimistic that we're still moving towards normal, regardless of, I forget what it is, Omicron or Thanos or whatever the next strain of COVID is called. We're in a posture now where we're really trying to work within those constraints and maintain a kind of culture of contact to the best of our ability.
So the next question is really about lab. So Blair's lab is high-low lab. I have the coastal adaptation lab. As Nora mentioned, Ron and Cynthia have Elements lab. Adam Reiseneck has a lab. And Elisa, there's a lot of people that have labs that focus on specific research-related activities that we are engaged in. And we apply for grants. We have often a lot of projects on the go, and we really love to engage our students in this. So the way that this works is we have a weekly e-blast, and when there's open positions at any of the labs, they're posted there. And often what works really well is just to have conversations, email Blair, email myself, email any of the faculty and say, like, I'm really interested in your work, in your research, and is there a way to get involved, whether it's through a directed study or whether it's through actual work in the lab. And I would say, like, that's, I think many universities have that, but I think we have our faculty members are quite involved in extracurricular work and trying to get our students involved. And even as Nora just mentioned with competitions, Fion, like he doesn't have a lab, but he engages a lot of students in the summer. So totally.
Yeah, and I'd also say, Nicole, that increasingly, I think our lab work is drifting into our teaching and vice versa. So the studio I'm running right now with Adam Reisnick was presented in part as a kind of extension of the work that we're doing in our labs, dealing with embodied carbon in constructed projects and how we begin to think about new approaches to construction and building. Case and I are talking about co-teaching a studio that does similar things and kind of thinks about bigger, more entangled ways that we research and work. So yeah, if you end up here, absolutely, my studio or my office is on the studio floor. I'm not hard to find, so bang on the door and come talk to me or talk to Case or anybody else you're interested in.
There's two questions for Janus here. I see you're typing vigorously. Is the GPA requirement calculated through all years? And then if you're accepted, is there an ability to defer by a year?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was just typing that one. So for the US and Canadian schools, the GPA is calculated using the upper level classes. So not necessarily which year you take the classes in. So if your numbering scale, for example, is 100 to 400 level classes, then we use your 300 and 400 level classes, regardless of what year they're taken in. So if you take a 300 level class in your first year, then that would be counted. If you take a 100 level class in your fourth year, that would not be counted. So I hope that makes sense. For international transcripts, anything other than US and Canada, we use the entire transcript to calculate GPA. And then if you're accepted, is there an ability to defer? So deferrals are pretty exceptional. Normally, we ask you to apply in the year that you plan to attend. So if there's something exceptional that comes up, like a health issue or some kind of family issue, then we can do deferrals. They would just go through the chair for approval and graduate studies for approval. So they do need to have a rationale and a pretty specific reason, but they can happen. And the maximum deferral is 1 year. So you can't defer and then defer again and sort of continue deferring for the next 20 years. But it is an option, usually for exceptional health situations.
You may have said this, Janus, but I'll add, for those of you worried about GPA that say early in your career or for one term stumbled a little bit, the evaluation of GPA, there is a threshold that UBC requires, but the evaluation that the faculty does isn't 100% cold-eyed. If, for example, a student had a really challenging time transitioning into university, but really kind of kicked it into gear at the end of their career, we'll think about that if your other materials are absolutely strong. So it isn't you fall below kind of this number and we throw you in the waste bin. There are a couple of different ways that we begin to look at and think about everybody's materials in their entirety.
Now, I
would have to say,
go ahead.
I would just have to say it has to be pretty close though to the minimal. It can't be, if it's a % off, something like that, then we do kind of look at it. But if it's, 70% instead of 76, then I would say probably not. But if it's like on that line, then yeah.
Yeah.
But grad studies is pretty strict about it with us, so we don't have a lot of choice in that regard. But
But I'm also saying when you get up at the top and you start parsing things and somebody has a really, really perfect GPA and somebody's is well above the threshold, but lower than that, we'll evaluate through a series of criteria to make our decisions.
And I wanted to say about the deferral, like the other challenge there might be, let's say you've been accepted into the program with a scholarship. The scholarship often doesn't get deferred, so that's also something to consider there.
Yeah. Study abroad, Caroline, no, I don't think that'd be a possibility. Our study abroads are pretty competitive. And you also have to bear in mind that everybody's been sitting in their bedrooms for 2 years. So it's really competitive this year. So I don't think you'd be able to come in as somebody not enrolled in the program yet and do the study abroad.
Yeah, and so I think if you get accepted into the program, Janus, what's your start date? It's like August 1st or something like that, right?
For which program?
For
Just
any
for
of the
deferral?
programs.
I mean,
Like, let's say-
you just start, usually people will start a year later, so.
Yeah, I was
It's
just going to
separate.
say, like, I think in the offer letter, you're kind of, you start paying tuition for the winter term 1, right? So it's, if either way, it gets complicated.
Yeah.
Where if there's an study abroad offered in the summer, you're technically not even a student at that point.
Yep. Lyle, great question. So the studios that we offer at the graduate level, we would classify as either course studios or option studios. Course studios are studios that everybody's required to take. So your first studio as a non-AP student would be a course studio, and you're basically, as Nora alluded to, you're learning kind of design principles, foundational skills, learning to draw, learning to communicate as a designer, those types of things. Another core studio that all students take is Comprehensive Studio, which Eamon discussed, which is a studio where for your accredited degree, we are basically asking all of the students to not only come up with a conceptual design for, or a schematic design for a landscape or a building or both. We're asking them to begin to incorporate systems, think about the construction and the execution of those projects and draw through those. Those are often in collaboration with professionals from the community. There are high contact studios. The 2 core studios meet 3 times a week as opposed to 2 times a week and are structured in that way. Then the other kind of studios that we offer are called options. And what that means is they're required studios for you to take between 1, 2, 3, 4, however many of them there are in your program you need to accomplish to satisfy your degree requirements. They're options because in any given term, there'll be between roughly 4 and say 13, 14 studios led by different instructors, some of them full-time tenured or tenure track faculty, and others are invited adjuncts that come in, and they'll offer a studio based on a topic of their choosing. They're often curated, like one semester it might have to do with the urban construct or the city, or it might have to do with housing, or it might have to do with something else like that. But they're offered through very, very different lenses, different people with different cultural backgrounds and different experiences. And then you as a student would rank what studio of those options you want to take, and you get decanted into those option studios. So the option is really that we're providing you with choices and you get to make choices about what you're interested in pursuing. It's a way for you to kind of tailor your experience while you're at SALA and begin to kind of decant yourself into different, not streams per se, but you can somewhat in kind of construct the way that you work through your design education that way.
I'm typing away here.
Okay, that's
There's a
cool.
GPA question here.
I'll
In
keep
terms
reading.
of internships,
Oh yeah, please.
Eamon or Nora, have you done an internship? Okay, so I would say like every student, at least in the landscape architecture program, I assume in the architecture program as well, will be assigned a supervisor, a faculty supervisor. That's often a great place to start, to have meetings with your faculty supervisor about if you're interested in an internship. Faculty supervisors can help with connections. Also those that if you're taking a vertical studio or a course studio, talk to your to those instructors. What Blair mentioned, often we have people from practice that we invite to reviews and critique. So often we get, or sometimes, or well, I get approached very often with requests from those in the profession that have internship possibilities, and so I'll let Tara Deans or someone else know that that's an option, or sometimes they ask for specific students. So it's definitely something we will help you with. I would say, like, after completing your first year, it's a little bit challenging more often to get an internship because you only have just 1 year of work under your belt. And sometimes some of the firms, they want people that are able to kind of draw the CAD drawings and kind of be fully employable. So it tends to be a little bit easier after your second year to do that. But there have been people that have been employed, particularly the AP students often, that are able to get internships right away. But we'll definitely help you with that.
You can also do co-ops, which is another option that's offered, where your intern experience is somewhat connected to your academic experience. And Greg Johnson, who leads design build projects and teaches a lot of our technical content in architecture, is also the person that helps you navigate the co-op program.
I'd also add that the SALA does run networking events, so you can meet with different firms or their representatives to review your portfolio, just talk about what they do at their firm, what the experience is like. So it's a bit more of an informal opportunity to get feedback on your applications and get to know where you want to apply as well.
Michael, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to add to that briefly that, like, the opportunity to look for internships is certainly present, and we regularly are contacted in our newsletter about, like, different opportunities. The alumni that come out of SALA, I found, are really involved with SALA, and I think that's really kind of comforting, that there's sort of a network of people that are kind of looking to revisit SALA. And so those events are a great opportunity for that purpose. And it's certainly kind of up to how you organize your summers. So I went fully into coursework in my summers, but I know many people who decided to kind of lighten coursework and instead do some internship as part of it.
And I would say that our students are across the board highly employable. Like, I think across both the MARC and MLA program, I think we did some numbers recently that I think 85% of the MLA students within 3 months of completing the degree has found a job. So I think we have a very good connection, particularly kind of regionally with the firms here, but many of us come from different places, either in Europe or North America. So we also can connect you there.
Yep. Yeah, the networks are pretty broad, and I'll add too that a lot of our students decide to pursue careers that are outside of architecture and landscape architecture and are wildly successful in those arenas too. So the employability isn't just within the kind of canonical disciplines that name the fields of studies that we're working on. They're much broader, the reach is. Michael, a quick answer for you. One, it's great you're interested in being a project architect. It's something we talk about quite a bit in all the disciplines, is how do we kind of push people into different roles in the profession. Some of our courses land squarely over the top of that, but I would argue a little more broadly and generally. There are courses like professional practice courses that look at the role of the professional architect or landscape architect in a much more kind of broad and inclusive sense. We do have studios sometimes that focus a bit more on execution. Like you talk about the carbon footprint of a building. I'm leading a design studio that's very much invested in the embedded carbon within a project as we execute it. I don't know that I could say that we have, say, a course that specifically works on how you manage a project through BIM and then kind of push forward into that world. There are fields of study that do that, and programs in the US and Canada that might give you that more focused opportunity. But there are ways that I think we could push you in that direction, or anybody who's interested in those types of things.
Yeah, and in terms, like, as you're saying, like, this is for everyone, the more kind of, if you have certain ideas of where you think this degree might take you, definitely like write that in your application. And you know, a key point here is like tell us why you think SALA is the place for you to pursue this. So I think we haven't really mentioned that, but I think maybe in the introduction, we understand that many of you will be applying to multiple programs, and you should do so, because that's you know, that's what you should do, and you never really know. Perhaps you're still kind of debating where you want to go. But it is important for us to kind of understand why you think SALA is a great place for you. So if you're kind of writing a template letter and you're just sending it to all the universities, probably the other universities also want to know why it is that you want to go to their place. So I think spend some time in the letter kind of explaining that you've done your homework in a way, and that you kind of tie it to specific courses, or people are mentioning design builds or study abroads or whatever the options are that are provided in the curriculum or at our program here that you're specifically interested in. That is really almost a prerequisite, because if we're just reading something that doesn't say SALA or UBC one time, like we're not sure whether or not you're actually interested in this program or if you want to go somewhere else. So I think those things are hugely important for writing your application.
I see that the questions have closed. Oh, now they're showing up again just to show me that it's not.
There is one that I've already responded to, but maybe everyone else wants to weigh in.
On GP?
Yeah, on GP.
Yeah.
Did you want to elaborate on that first, Nora?
Yeah, I already responded, but basically the GP is broken up into two parts. They take place across the last two terms of your program. During GP1, which is the first part, you're situating your research, doing literature reviews, defining the project that you're going to actually design a response to in GP2. During GP2, you're usually only taking one other course, which is professional practice, so you have plenty of time to focus on it. But during GP1, when you're doing your research and defining your problem, you are in studio, you have a full course load. So that's quite a tough moment for you. And I'd also say that even though it generally takes place in your final year, if you are looking to do collaborations with Indigenous communities or generally research involving humans, you usually start earlier. So in my case, for example, I do have an Indigenous community partner. So I've been working nearly 1 year in advance to get through the ethics review process and just make sure that the project actually helps the community. So you can start earlier is what I'm saying.
That's great. That's great, Nora. Yeah, and I think too, if you carry an interest, like I think about the person that posted a question about music and engineering and their background, hang on to those interests and track them through. And it's entirely reasonable for you to have an idea in your head that you want to work in that area. I'm sure, Nora, I'm sure you didn't just show up and just like it was a Wednesday and you go, hey, Indigenous communities. There was probably an interest there and kind of a kind of embedded trajectory that you were following through with. I'll also add that the GP or the thesis project, we call it a graduate project. That's why we're saying GP. So thesis and graduate project, as far as terminology, is interchangeable for us at SALA. It's evolving. So one of the projects that Case and I are working on is what is the GP or the thesis project in the coming year to 5 years? How does it potentially more robustly connect to some of the research that's going on at the school? Are there other ways to think about it? So great description of what it is. That's likely what it's going to be as you enter the school, but it's also in process. It's a changing thing, an evolving thing, as it should be. Everything in academia should be refreshing and evolving and kind of updating. I also want to just say one more general thing. You all folks on this call probably realize and recognize this. These are both accredited programs, which means that they do put you in position to become an intern, to work towards sitting for your license in whichever discipline you're focusing in. You're not required to do so, but both of the programs are absolutely set up to do that. And both of them have reciprocity with North American schools. So your degree here would allow you to enter the system in the United States, for example, and I think a lot of other countries internationally.
In terms of the MARCLA program, and maybe just some information. So if you're applying to any of the programs, your application will always be read by multiple people, and there's kind of deliberation after everyone has reviewed the different files. So for MARCLA students, typically you have landscape faculty look at the file and architecture faculty look at the file, and then in the past years, Blair and I then kind of look at the kind of long list of applicants that have been recommended, perhaps to be to put forth for the program, and then we kind of have to make a difficult decision because it's like a very demanding program. It's also a program that there's very little flexibility in terms of the amount of classes that you can take. So we don't have a specific amount of spots, but in the past, I think we've tried to get between like 6 to 8 students entering the MARCLA program on an annual basis, to give you a little bit of an idea.
All right. Great.
So yeah, I think
these are both MARCLA and
for advice on the programs. Yeah, Janus is typing that. I think Janus is on the MARC side. Tara Deans will be on the MLA side for now.
Yeah, although there's a new hire, I think, starting next week, so we may have a new person in that role. One thing I'd like to reiterate: this was stated in a specific typed answer that I made to one of the earlier questions on the question and answer. Is MARCLA? All the programs are challenging to get into, of course. MARCLA is really, really specific, and the incoming class for MARCLA is very small. If you have an interest in MARCLA, but also in MLA or MARC or both, you should consider doing multiple applications, because your application to MARCLA will not get you into one of the other streams. It's just the way that we structure our admissions processes. So we've had students that have applied to MARCLA who weren't successful getting into MARCLA, but were successful getting into the MARC program or into the MLA program. So that is an option for you. So if you're entertaining MARCLA and it's MARCLA or nothing, that's great. But if you have an interest in working in one of the other programs, do multiple applications to give yourself a better shot of joining the school. And
let's say you're applying to the MARC or MLA program and you get into those programs, and then let's say after a semester you think that, oh, I really want to get into the MARCLA degree. It means that the following cycle of admissions, you'll have to apply for the MARCLA process for the MARCLA. So you'll be evaluated against everyone else applying to that MARCLA program. So there's no so-called backdoor into the MARCLA program. It's not that you can apply to the MARC program, get admitted in there, and then somehow end up in the MARCLA program. So you will have to reapply the following year for the MARCLA program. And of course, we'll take the courses that you've taken into consideration, and you'll probably, if successful, get kind of an AP MARCLA status. But there's an advantage of familiarity and track record. I mean, we're human beings. If we know you and spend a year with you, we'll know what you're about more than we will if it's a blind application. So. All right, are thesis students responsible for approaching a thesis advisor, or is it internally delegated? That is a migrating thing. So it used to be completely just like speed dating. It really was. It was just like a bunch of people finding each other in the dark, or through their experiences together, through their courses of study. In architecture, it's kind of a hybrid scenario where the students
and the faculty interact with one another through the GP1 process, there's a point where the students choose, rank who they would like to be working with as their mentor for their GP project. And then there's a sort, because people have varying degrees of interest depending on what the topic is flowing through the school, or who has more presence, or litany of reasons. And then there is a sort. So it's not entirely certain that you would get your first choice for a mentor, but there's a lot of work done to make sure that you get one of your top choices for a mentor. So I think that kind of covers that. I'm assuming MLA is similar in that regard.
Yeah, and in very rare circumstances, like Nora's circumstance, where he was in John Bass's studio, and John Bass is an architecture prof, but Nora's GP is carrying on with the relationships that were built as part of that studio. So for their GP, John Bass is their advisor, so that can happen. So it's rare, but yeah, we're trying to be flexible and trying to work with whatever works best for the student.
Yep. Right. And I think that also implies if you do work and it turns into research that gets really entangled with a specific faculty member, odds are if your GP continues that research, you'd have a chance to do that. Nobody would block you from doing that, I don't think.
Okay, we're gonna have the last question here by Jordan, and then Janice is already typing it up.
Well, I do have office hours on Mondays at 1 p.m. I have not had anyone attend them in about a month, but I sit there and I'm there. I can also set up individual Zoom meetings. That's sort of what I prefer, because then we know that we're in our own meeting together and no one's going to pop in. So just email me. I'm just going to write the email again in the answer to that question, and then we can just set up a Zoom meeting. I'm not really doing meetings in person now, just because of COVID, but I prefer to do Zoom.
Right. And then for me, if I'm fairly open to speak to whomever, but I have to confess that I don't spend a ton of time. I spend a lot of time with students who are in the program and working with folks in that regard. And, I'm happy to answer questions that I can about what's possible with the program and where you're going. I'm a little more reluctant to do kind of coachings for what you should kind of present to get in. And the reason for that isn't because I don't want you to get in. It's because one of my roles and Case's role in the MLA program is we're supposed to adjudicate and sit over the top of kind of impartial deliberations of all the materials. So it's kind of it's unethical for me to give you one person an insider's track to getting into the program and not somebody else, and then sit in judgment of the processes that are put in place to help assess who gets into the program. So it's just me trying to be impartial more than anything, if that makes sense. So I tend to, I'm sorry for this, Janice, defer to Janice and some other people to answer those questions on the front end.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Emma put it in the chat. Some of our reviews will be, well, there, like I saw many of the people when they typed in where they were zooming in from from the region. So we have some thesis reviews, and some reviews are in person that there's maybe an opportunity to join those. There's some of them that will be online as well. So keep an eye on the SALA website. There'll be information there, and if you want to know more about the work that's being produced, that's a great way to get a little bit of an insight there.
Yep. All are welcome. Well, thank you, everyone. I am looking at the clock and looking at the current lack of questions. I think this is going to conclude our session. Thank you, Eamon, and thank you, Nora, and thank you, Janus, for your time, and Emma for your support in making this, I think, an informative and a good event. And we look forward to seeing your applications and to hearing from you, and hopefully to getting to know a bunch of you in the coming year.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, folks.
Here.